Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Saco City Council Workshop Meeting for Monday, February 12th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. I would like to make note that all members of council are present this evening, including City Administrator Bahenko. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. And next on the item tonight, we do have public comment. If there is any member of the public wishing to speak, please step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes to speak.
I apologize, it went out on me. There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Archer, 185 Bradley Street. I want to thank you very much for those of you or all of you that did watch the video and looked at my part 1 and part 2 of my public comment that is also to be part of the record with what I'm also going to discuss right now. And the only one that I had mentioned in my part 2 from today is I wanted to just really talk about D. The Planning Department shall refer applications for contract zoning to the City Council for initial feedback before forwarding to the Planning Board for public hearing. A staff recommendation to be added to 1705. I'd like to mention C first. The written petition submission is changed from the Planning Board to the City of Saco. That's the red line. And then in D, it states Planning Department shall provide to City Council. Who is it in the City of Saco revision of the petitioner? Who are they actually going to give it to, and what would be that process? Then I would like to, personally, as far as when we talk about D, it's a hard one for me. There are 2 sides to this coin. If I was seeking a contract zone, personally, me, it is my personality to reach out to the decision makers first. I normally would want to come to you first and then go to Planning Board because that's who I am. And to get to gauge the temperature, you're the decision makers eventually, so I want to gauge that temperature. I want to obtain information prior to preparing for my presentation and testimony to the Planning Board. However, on the other side of the coin, and I'm struggling with this one, however, for fairness, equitable, independent, and consistent review for all petitioners, here, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, all of us, I side with the fact that the Planning Board has the in-depth knowledge and experience in land use and should remain the first stop in this process. It removes any implicit or bias that could have been created if this process is now reversed. So please keep it to be the Planning Board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly.
Good evening. I'm Inga Brown. I live at 161 Simpson Road. I guess I'd like to just say first, I'd like to, as an individual, thank the Saco Police Department, the Fire Department, all the surrounding police departments, all of the community members who responded so admirably and bravely on Friday. And I know as a Thornton Academy teacher, really appreciate that. And having an SRO officer at our school and a director of security was pivotal and truly monumental for the safety of everyone. So I wanted to say that. I'm not quite sure where to begin. I'm happy to see that we're looking at the zoning ordinance and contract zone ordinance revision. I've put a lot of time and thought into the contract zone process in Saco. I am pleased that there will be a compliance officer. I think that until we have compliance reports that are well-designed and actually prove parts of the contract zone clauses, I feel that many of the reports currently are sort of like a freshman might have written them. They're just not very well-written reports. The formats are not very good. So in compliance, I would ask you to continue your discussions around that. I do not feel that contract zones should come to the council first. I've thought about this for a while. I truly believe that the planning board is the place for a contract zone to first appear, for the planning board's independent review, for the planning board's knowledge of the zoning ordinance. And I agree with Ms. Archer on that count. I know that there are other folks who I think feel the same. And while on paper, I understand why it might make sense for a contract zone to be vetted a little bit by council first, I do understand that. I do not think that is really long-run appropriate and really in the best interest of all stakeholders. I have reviewed the February 6th oral arguments in front of the Maine Supreme Law Court. I am extremely concerned about the culture that still exists around contract zones. The appeal by Saco, to me, is extremely revealing of a problematic culture around contract zones, that you may have a contract zone that says null and void, but by the city's interpretation, that's really not quite true in that it's perhaps voidable, or we can take care of this maybe in another way. I don't think that contract zone agreements, many of them, not all of them, have been well written. And I know that. I've had independent legal counsel look at some of those contract zone agreements. They are written in favor of the applicant. And if you are in a butter to a contract zone, those documents do not represent your interests. There is vague language. There is very unspecific language in those contracts. And when I ask staff, and I get a response from City Council through staff that says, gee, we're really sorry. That really is kind of vague, isn't it? Geez, that language isn't very specific. It's not hard to understand what some of these contract zones are trying to achieve. And it is not about equity and fairness. I guess in closing, I do have questions. I would like to know if the Maine DEP has signed off on the 2021 zoning ordinance and zoning map. I would like to know if Saco is going to adapt the 2016 FEMA map. And I guess lastly, my last question or comment is this. We all know that employers or even schools, sometimes you have to sign an agreement. You have to sign an academic honesty agreement. Or as an employee, I have to sign an employee handbook every year that says I understand the rules in this handbook. Yet we can't even have contract zone recipients sign off on anything that shows that they understand the parameters of their contract zone agreement. Oh, I didn't know that.
Hate to interrupt, but
Thank you. I'll stop.
you don't have to stop, but
Thank you.
thank you.
So, oh, I didn't know that was in my contract zone agreement. Oh, I didn't know I couldn't build a new building, that had to come before site plan review. That is inexcusable. So how can we hold contract zone recipients accountable? I appreciate the movement in the compliance department, but even if you have, again, compliance reports that don't really mean anything, then I don't think that we really care about compliance. So I'm looking forward to following your discussion this evening, and I appreciate your time and effort on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wishing to speak? Okay, not seeing anyone asking to be recognized, we move on to the workshop. And tonight we do have City Planner Prescott with us and Code Director Toomey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a brief overview of our housekeeping ordinance amendments. We first introduced this topic to the Council and Planning Board during the joint Planning Board meeting on December 18th. We gave you a list of items we were looking at to bring forward. On January 8th, we did the new business review, and then on January 29th, these have been forwarded they went through a first reading and they were forwarded for a public hearing on March 4th. So just so we know where we're at today. Just to overview, these will be updates, general updates to chapters 179, 188, and 230. What you see before you is sort of an abridged version of that housekeeping ordinance amendments document. You will receive the full red lines where they sit within each section of the ordinance during your public hearing. So you will receive a pretty long public hearing packet that will reflect the discussion that we have today. So appreciate the councilor's time. Again, just most of the reasons for the requested revisions are to add cross-references where applicable. We found that staff were looking for certain provisions in the zoning ordinance from where they sat in the previous zoning ordinance and didn't really understand how things had been cross-referenced or changed. So we think it's important to add some of those cross-references. We're looking to clarify several uses and definitions. One of the perfect examples of this is we have a couple of definitions that are just a little bit ambiguous that you've seen in the Chapter 230 section. Align zoning uses with district descriptions. An example of this is in the Portland Road Zone, which is where we have hotels and motels, and the description of the actual zone within the zoning ordinance calls out hotels, but hotel is just not a permitted or a conditional use in the table of permitted and conditional uses for that Portland Road Zone. So that would be a prime example of that. And then clarify certain sections of site plan and subdivision review. And happy to get into as much detail as we want today on any sections that we want to go line by line or anything like that, but we can certainly start with some questions. Just an overview of the crosswalk document that we provided in the meeting packet. Planning Department has been doing this for every ordinance revision, and we will continue to do it for ordinance revisions as they come forward. What this is a take on a federal government crosswalk showing how the changes are made throughout the document so we can go back and have a pretty good historical reference of what was changed and why. And again, we will update this to reflect any changes from this workshop. We have kept the same formatting of this document, so if you went through the sewer ordinance review or the LD 2003 ordinance revisions, it's the same formatting. So now we can dive right into it. I know there were a few comments from the January 8th new business review, so I'll just kind of briefly go through those if you don't mind, and then we can jump into the rest. The first one that I have was there were dimensional standards of the business industrial zoning district listed. I think we clarified that in the meeting, but that was just a drafting error that we wanted to clarify. So there is no change from 20 to 50. There's a section here that says, in what we provided, that shows 20 where it was originally 50. That is just a drafting error correction. As far as urban green space, we struck that section and we will be bringing it back as part of a low impact development package. We are certainly interested in, if you want to talk as a council tonight about increasing the mailed notification distance for development review projects. One thing that we went back and looked at as staff is perhaps that distance goes from 200 to 400 feet in certain areas, specific to downtown, and we retained 600 in the other areas. That's just a suggestion. We can certainly talk about it. And then the other one that was probably one of the bigger ones we received a comment on as well from one of our long-range planning committee members was the current food-related and fast food-related uses, which remain a bit unclear. We've been working with code on that specifically. I think the first piece of that is definitely to put the term fast food in the definitions under food and drink. I know it seems like a small thing, but it definitely helps you examine all the food-related uses together. And then to clarify some of the language so that right now it's limited, but as to only eating off premises for fast food. We know people can certainly sip their coffee while leaving the drive-through, so on or off premises where it is sold would be some language that would want to work with. So we can certainly take that internally. If you feel like that's a good direction, we can discuss it further, but I just want to let you know we did follow up on that as well, and I'm glad that Dave Toomey is able to join us from Code today because he does a lot of zoning administration at his desk as well. So with that, happy to take any questions.
And just a reminder to council, with the workshop process, feel free to speak as long as nobody's talking over each other. You do not need to be recognized by me. Open conversation and dialogue.
I guess I'll kick it off. Since I had brought up the noticing requirements last workshop, I was intending to, spread it across all of the ordinance. I had, again, walked away from here and thought about it, and not certain, but I think these standards or these distances go back all the way to 1985. So as I had stated at the time, I thought that the 200-foot distance was not adequate for, today's time, but thinking about it further, I also think that it should be extended on the other side too. So I had arrived at 800 feet for all zones except the HDR, the downtown, and all the business zones, and then 400 feet for the HDR, downtown, and all business zones. So that's where I was thinking. Again, if you think that if this dates back to 1985, the population of Saco was about 10,000 people, it's double that now. So obviously, if you are trying to capture as many people as possible, and to me it was always kind of strange when you think, okay, a shorter distance, yet it's a more dense area. Aren't the impacts of any project actually felt greater in a higher density area? But again, I'm not proposing going to 800. But even if you look out in rural sections of Saco, 600 feet probably isn't adequate anymore because we have neighbors closer and closer. So if the intent is to keep people informed, have them participate, I think, I understand there's an added cost to whoever's proposing the project, but to me it's kind of part of the project, or part of the process at least. So that's what I would propose for a change.
I would just chime in and agree. I think for all the reasons you've stated, and again, it's my understanding that the actual out-of-pocket cost of notification comes from the applicant. So aside from generating a longer list, we wouldn't have much in the way of added costs in increasing that distance. Is that correct?
No, not in the way of mailing, because the applicant would pay for that.
Yeah. And I do think that, I think we owe it to our community to expand the scope of notification. It's still amazing to me sometimes that folks really don't know what's going on, and they're not in the notification range, but they're pretty close, and then their neighbors start talking, and that's how they find out. So I would be very supportive. I think those dimensions I don't have any strong feeling either way. I think pushing it out to 800 and increasing the a different level in the downtown and closer districts would be fine.
I also think that maybe adding some exceptions, we have to define them as a team, but exceptions, for example, when the Turnpike entrance came in, I'm on the back side of Hillview, so I didn't get noticed, but I got noticed for the rezoning that we're currently going to be seeing soon. For areas of subdivisions, if an abutter is in a subdivision, why not expand that scope to the whole subdivision? The subdivision becomes a definition of who's counted. Then you're not even talking about feeded, you're not talking about footage, you're talking about known subdivisions. Again, exceptions to the rules, but maybe even considering things to that nature. Because when you're talking about affecting a subdivision, it's really the whole subdivision, even if it's only 80, 60 feet out. So, but again, that's an exception, something there's probably other exceptions out there as well.
That's a good point, Counselor. Because again, if you think of it in the context that if before that lot was subdivided, it was under one ownership, and if they were within that distance, all of, that property owner was being notified. Now you've subdivided it, and you may have 80 houses that are way back. They're still, pertinent to whatever is occurring. So I like that. I don't know how you go about crafting it, but
I think it would just be a subsection saying subdivisions will be included as an abutter
entirety.
If you're in a certain distance.
Selena Prescott?
Yes, so thank you. So we can certainly, so there's this, just want to be clear that when we do the abutter notices, we use a computer program that actually outlines your 600 or 800 foot distance. Lisa in my office does spend time actually, like especially if it's a condo association where people live close together, sometimes only like 5 units in the association are picked up, but there might be 15. She usually will add those extra 10 units already. So there's a difference in my mind between an SOP and having to write like an exception in the ordinance. So we would be happy to capture that kind of thing in an SOP, that if you're already mailing to half the subdivision, just mail to the full subdivision. Well, yeah. And also too, sometimes it becomes a challenge because the records have not all caught up electronically, so we try to capture that as well as best we can. But I can certainly make a note to add that individual item to our SOP on how we do things in the department.
I have a quick question. Is there a formal method in the SOP that tells us that there's any electronic notification or posting on social media or on our website? Is that included or detailed?
Is there for posting online about a development review? No, we don't have an SOP for that right now. We do, when a development proposal comes in, we do send a mailed notification now as a courtesy. So whenever we receive an application, we actually auto-send a notice to let people know that we're reviewing something. That is not in the ordinance in every section. It's only under subdivision, but we do it religiously now. And we also have a sign that has to get placed on the property, so people driving by outside of that notice radius who may not get mailed notification should be able to see the sign. So no, we don't have a SOP on social media outreach for every project. We have been trying to provide planning board reports and updates in the city newsletter, though.
I mean, in my mind, that's almost as important. By increasing the radius for mailed notifications, we're actually increasing the cost and therefore a little bit of the burden on people trying to do a project, which, in the efforts to inform people, that's important, and we do want, informed citizens and abutters. But to the degree we can keep those costs down and keep the process easy while still increasing that notification and awareness, to me, that seems to really strike a nice middle ground where people are aware and can participate without increasing costs and burden on the people trying to do projects.
And one more thing, if I can, just circle back to the social media question. We don't post them on social media, but we do post all of the initial applications on our projects under review page, which I would love if more information could be shared about with people in different wards. You can see all the projects that the planning department is reviewing right now that have formal application submissions. They're all organized by address, and you can see if whatever it is, if it's a minor review or a planning board review, whatever it is, you can see the initial application submission on here. We are working toward enhancing this page, but right now it's again, the initial application submission.
Yeah, I think that's really great, and I really applaud you guys for doing that. I know that's been a relatively recent effort. It requires active participation by people to go look at. And so if you're not generally following the planning board, but you do have something in your neighborhood, you might not know to go look there, and that's where some of the push-out notifications can be really helpful.
And in that vein, though, on the City of Saco website, maybe once every quarter or once, 3 times a year or something, just as a repetitive post, though, sort of like when the mayor has her meetings, a reminder that the meetings are on Tuesday. Well, just a reminder to the public, if you're curious about planning, this is where you go, though, because obviously we get new people in, they're not familiar with the website, and obviously it can be a little Byzantine if you're not used to where it goes, even in a perfectly designed website. So just always that push reminder, just by putting it out there, will, it just gives that extra layer of, I should be looking at this, I should be paying attention to this, though. So that way, it prevents, again, us having to do the legwork of, well, obviously we can't do social media, and I was going to ask about, people who sign up for emails for city information, if we could give them essentially an email, but at the same time, this kind of splits the middle, though, because it allows people to get that information without us having to basically have staff having to comb through our emails to find out who's in what ward, who should be getting email if they're already getting mail. As much as I'd like to have them get emails, obviously I don't want to burden the staff if they have to go through 30 or 40, or depending on how big the ward is or the area is.
We do have email notifications for our planning board agenda page, so everything that gets published on this page then has an email push out to it. So you can opt in via text or email. I like the text one.
On a slightly different note, and pardon me if this is just my ignorance, but I'm a little bit confused about the changes in fast food restaurant and restaurant. And I'm wondering if you can clarify those. Are we now saying that restaurants and fast food restaurants are going to be regulated in the same way and permitted in the same places? And does that matter if there's a drive-through or not? And is that the intent of these changes? I do see some differences between where we might want fast food restaurants and where we might want, say, eating and drinking establishments. And there are places where we might want a fast food restaurant that does not have a drive-through versus where it does. And I've just gotten a little bit confused by that discussion and where we are with that.
Yeah, so the way that it was written was quite confusing and a little bit ambiguous. So different food use related categories that were fast food or not could fit under both to some degree. So the big piece for our departments will be to clarify what uses are used when. I think we got some good feedback from January 8th that we really want to limit where drive-throughs, fast food restaurants are going, but still allow banks to have a drive-through, like we have a bank, a financial institution drive-through window service is what it's called as a use in the downtown, but we want to keep drive-through fast food related uses out of the downtown, which makes perfect sense. So we will endeavor to bring something back unless someone has a way that they want to change it now, which we will certainly review, but we will update that and bring it through legal review before the public hearing. And then the other thing is just making sure like fast food stands on its own under F in the document, and then you go down to food and drink, so it's just in the, putting it in the right place under food and drink. So you may wind up with 4 uses just clarified under food and drink, or we may come back recommending 3 uses all clarified under food and drink. Do you want to add anything, Dave? Okay.
That's perfect, because I actually view bank drive-throughs and fast food drive-throughs as fundamentally different things. I don't think window service or drive-through should encompass both of those. I also want to be really careful. I think Saco scoop window service and a drive-through fast food restaurant are also fundamentally different, and I'd like to find a way to sort that too somehow. And I don't know if that's, the walk-up is the difference, but I view those as slightly different uses too. And I also, yeah, and I think fast food versus a food and drink establishment should remain separate, and there are places we may want to permit one and not permit the other, maybe even regardless of the drive-through service. So if we can keep those separate, I think that'd be ideal.
Thanks. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, this is something I brought up last time, and I honestly, I wish I had a matrix for the zoning ordinance revision, because this was painful to try to figure out how we got the way it is. But what I did discover, going through my notes, is that that fast food use actually is a holdover definition from the prior zoning ordinance. And the issue that occurred when we merged all these different definitions and uses was they had, for lack of better terms, I guess what they were allowing was fast food restaurants with window service in the downtown and the general business. And so after a series of conversations with former planners, we, I guess, amended a definition somewhat, but actually, having looked at this since then, what I had suggested at the time was to just bring back the drive-through. There was two prior definitions. It was drive-through financial and drive-through food establishment, I think is what it was termed. And so the way I read the current ordinance, I could be wrong, but it looks as though drive-through window service is not allowed in the downtown or the general business, but the financial institution drive-through window service was added back in. But then the fast food restaurant definition, which again, it's very confusing for anybody trying to figure out what we're trying to do, also remained. So the way I view this, a fast food restaurant with window service could not currently locate there. So that was my end result, and I hope that's the case, but I think that the work has actually been done to ensure that there's a separation currently. So, again, it sounds like we're all on the same page as what the goal is. Whether or not we still need two definitions or three definitions for food, I mean, when you look at eating establishment or the way, and I think that was the original goal, is we had several definitions, and it was trying to get it down to what's the intent? This is food related. Do we really need to separate whether you take the food away or eat it in, at the location? And